User DH7 says, we seem to have lost something since that sort of humour has been seen as unacceptable, yet blatant sex scenes have become the norm. You're absolutely right. The real problem is that we've lost the we've lost the sort of the whiff of innuendo. It's either done with a nod or a wink or a leer, and I think there's something to be said for the sort of deadpan innuendo of things like "Are you being served?" or I think the best pantomime is deadpan humour. I tried it when I was last doing panto, and certainly the first scene, the audience was sort of slightly confused. I mean, the old man's gone slightly mad. He doesn't realise what he's saying. But the second scene, I got some serious belly laughs, and I was terribly pleased. It's all a matter of saying these lines without the slightest hint that I'm in on the joke. And Mrs. Slocum, Molly Sugden, was a master at that. It's so cold, my pussy's been frozen solid. And or my pussy got stuck in the rain and I had to dry it out with the hairdryer. And what was the other one? I was late this morning because I couldn't get my pussy to come. And it's an absurdity, really. But it went on from there with Mr. Humphreys. I'm free, delivered in a manner that suggests something more than his availability for customer service. And Frank Thornton, who went on to be in what was it? Standing on the corner waiting. I can't remember the musical. Me and My Girl. He was in that show for years, and he was wonderful. And I used to creep in and watch the second half night after night while I was while I was doing a master's thing down the road in the Strand, and I just thought his delivery, again, his deadpan humour, was impeccable. In one episode of Are You Being Served, he says, your skirt's riding a bit high, Miss Brahms. To which she says, well, it's either that or the top falling down. Mr. Lucas, he goes over to Mrs. Slocum on one occasion and says, your hair looks nice, Mrs. Slocum. What colour will it be tomorrow? And it just sort of, it's so deliciously indifferent to the norms of proper interaction. And it's not woke. It's not about a fear of woke. It's a fear of, it's an inability to think of two things at the same time, I think, that we've got into, and this sort of mental agility, I think is great fun. And we seem to want everything dished out on a plate today with one meaning. But the point is that words and ideas entertain a multiplicity of meanings, depending on your own perspective. And this innuendo thing exposes that in a beautiful way. Carry On Camping in 1969, one of the earlier Carry On films, Sid James comes in a yoga class. He says, fancy going for a bit of old bending and stretching. And then Kenneth Williams, of course, has got all the lines. He doesn't really do a lot of innuendo. He just does a lot of noises, and they are superb. I mean, the great line, infamy, oh infamy, they've got infamy, and Carry On Cleo. The line, I think, was stolen from Barry Cryer, or at least that's the story that Barry Cryer tells. In Carry On Doctor, Barbara Windsor said, but Doctor, I've got nothing on, to which the Doctor replies, perfect. It's dodgy, of course, but it's a well-worn tradition. It's the Are You Being Served, Carry On, significant era in the history of television and film where humour was clearly layered, relying on wordplay, suggestive content. It was risque, but it was still veiled. And today, the subtlety of innuendo and comedy has given way to more explicit content. This transition reflects a broader cultural shift, including changes in censorship, audience expectations, and the norms of entertainment. And as censorship loosened, oh, Calcutta and all that sort of stuff, taboos around sex diminished, films and televisions began incorporating more direct content. What was once suggested through a clever turn of phrase or a raised eyebrow became explicitly described. Not only the sex, but also the violence. And this shift can be seen in the contrast between the innuendo-laden comedies of the past and the more explicit, in-your-face stuff in contemporary media, and the more brutal violence. The violence has become more graphic. Earlier works implied violence or used it sparingly, but modern media frequently showcases explicit nastiness, and the shift towards more graphic depiction could be attributed to desensitization and the push for more realistic depiction of conflict and of the sort of extremes of human experience. And you know what is so extraordinary about real violence is it seems so unsensational. As I'm speaking as somebody who's been held at gunpoint on 3 occasions, and number one, there's an element of humour that runs through that extreme experience. But number two, it doesn't seem as dramatic at the time as it clearly was. And yet, when you look at violence on television or in the cinema, it's always very, very forceful. Everything's much bigger, and it's an artistic interpretation of reality. It's not reality. Reality is bland, dull, and rather unexpected. And television, film violence, you sort of it's set up and then it happens, and it's all extended in a form of presentation which isn't real. And some critics argue that this trend towards explicitness, explicit violence, explicit sex represents a degeneration of film and television, and they contend that the reliance on overt sexual content and brutality sacrifices the wit and the creativity that characterized earlier forms of entertainment. The subtlety of innuendo required a level of sophistication and engagement from the audience, a level of complicity with the audience, which is often lost in the more explicit content, which frankly, a lot of the more explicit content is soporific. There's nothing that sends me to sleep quicker than a good action film. However, others might argue that these changes reflect a more honest and liberated approach to storytelling, addressing subjects that were previously taboo and pushing the boundaries of what TV and film can explore. But if we're going to explore reality, we need to do so with audience connivance, with audience participation in some way. The audience need to be in on the presentation. Otherwise, it's just the audience is simply a passive observer of the stuff on telly or the stuff on film. And that's the point. The innuendo thing keeps the audience alive, keeps the audience active, because they have to participate, and they have to use their imagination to fill in the bits. And as I say, the violence on TV is not real. real violence is dull. And the transition from innuendo to explicit content in British comedy and beyond is a complex phenomenon driven by changing norms, by changing media landscapes, while the clever, suggestive humour, and it is clever, of Carry On and Are You Being Served, has a nostalgic appeal. The current media landscape reflects different audience expectations and artistic intentions. Whether this represents a degradation or an evolution of humour and storytelling, that is a matter of perspective, and it's a matter that should be debated. I don't think we should be afraid of popular entertainment. I think we need to explore it.